welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, well, welcome. You are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And what we're going to do tonight is read some old folklore and fairy tales, as per promise. If you are watching this live, you should know that there is a live chat, and it is currently growing a little crop of potatoes who are talking, including Uncle Kitty, GS, Jumstore, Genera, probably a few more out there lurking. I apologize if you had dropped into the earlier URL. I had a bit of an issue on this end, and I had to trash it. So we might have some people trickle over who don't realize that that one is private now. Right. What are we doing tonight? Well, tonight I am going to be reading more of the Wild Hunt stories. It's actually a bit surprising it's taken me this long to get to them, because it was kind of the first thing. Like, I have a few different phases of Fireside Fairytales, and the first of the most popular and consistent phase I've had of it was a Wild Hunt collection of tales from Jürgen Hubertus' collection, which is also where we're going to be reading from tonight. But even then, and especially now since he's translated more, there was a lot of stuff I did not read from Jürgen Hubertus' collection. And we're going to try and get to at least one section of them. And that is specifically all the various origin tales of the Wild Hunt in Germany, specifically, because it is all over the place. Folks, let me know if the audio's bad or wrong or whatever else. I had to do some more work with the audio last week, as I noticed it was still cooking a bit. So hopefully the buzz is gone by now. It was in my recordings of it, but that was kind of the case as well. I see Lizzie Rose has joined and says, yay, Wild Hunt. Yes, I do really enjoy the Wild Hunt. So this is actually going to be a bit of a longer stream. These stories are a little more involved than some of the ones we normally read from the German collection. But I'm going to catch you up. If you folks are new to the concept of the Wild Hunt and you're watching this. But if you don't need any of that and you're not watching this live, you should know that down in the description below there will be timestamps and you can jump ahead to whatever story most interests you. Uncle Kitty says, I did have to turn it up a little. Well, I can turn my mic up a bit. Let's see if that helps. Okay. So, just very quickly organize some stuff here. Okay. The Wild Hunt. So, by most accounts, the least controversial thing I can say about the Wild Hunt is that its origin seems to have been Odin and Thor, or just Thor, or just Odin, depending on who you ask, or Wotan, leading the Valkyries across the skies on basically a pack of horses in a storm on a hunt, and that this wild hunt is and that the Wild Hunt is generally around winter solstice, or what we call nowadays the 12 days of Christmas. It was 12 days of feasting and so on, and it has a few tropes. So the first thing is it has the trope of you need to keep your door shut. If you leave your door shut or open during the night, what happens depends on the tradition that you're looking at. It could be everything from they sweep in and carry you off and you're never seen again, or killed, or whatever else, or cursed. Or in the case of Frau Gauden, which we talked about the last time, she leaves a little dog by your door and you are obligated to take care of it for a year. and if you don't, terrible things happen. Like, there's lots of variations on it, but there, in general, there's this idea of, like, you know, batten down the windows, close the door when the wild hunt is flying during solstice. Number 2, it doesn't always take place on solstice, though it is often associated to that. It's usually a bunch of hunters. They're generally, by the time you get to the generations of folklore that we are going to look at collections from, is associated to some sort of evil or curse. They ride across the sky. If you choose to ride with them, you usually wind up in bad or dire straits, but not exclusively. Sometimes things go well. And on the more controversial side, it is my pet theory that I advanced when I did this the first time, and I will maintain through this one, that actually the wild hunt is one of the more prominent and likely origins of our myth of Santa Claus. You know, you have this thing that rides through the sky. You can hear him go by. You got to pretend that you're asleep, which is very, to me, close in connection to the idea of, like, keep your door shut. Don't be looking out the window, whatever else. And a lot of the wild hunt has a moral component. Some of it straight up about giving kids gifts. With Frau Gauden, we see that. So that is the very broad version of some details of the wild hunt. It is one of the most common myth cycles in Europe. It may have reached beyond that, I don't know. But it is one of the most common myth cycles in Europe. You will find versions of it everywhere, and probably the most common modern person's contact with it is the Witcher 3 game, which you can see. I have Geralt's figure behind me. I have played it. But this won't really resemble that much for a few reasons, not the least of which being that is a Polish story, and generally uses Polish folklore references for it. But also because in The Witcher, it's just their own rendition of it. Okay. So what are we specifically looking at with the wild hunt? Well, last time we looked at it in general. We just sort of took a sampling of stories about it. In this case, what we're going to be looking at is the different origin stories of the wild hunt. And I did look at some last time, but there were a whole list of them that I didn't. So we're going to look at those. In total, I believe we have 7 origin stories. Some a little short, but most are actually pretty long. If we have the time at the end, I may be persuaded to read the additional origin story of Frau Gauden again, because it is my favorite figure in folklore. I was going to say my favorite piece of folklore, but that's not true. And it is quite Christmassy, but we'll see how time goes. And also I have read it before, so if you want to read it, if you want to hear it read, you should go watch the original Wild Hunt stream, which would have been a couple of years ago, pretty much this same first week of December, though. Okay. Hopefully everyone has caught up enough to at least follow along. Pardon me. And since we're talking about the wild hunt, I'll get a little bit of stormy background going on. Our first tale tonight comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of translated German folklore from Jürgen Hubert, who you can support at his Patreon of the same name, Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, and you should. The song is called, the story is called Hackelnberg, and we have read one version of this before, this origin, but this is the other one. Hackelnberg was a forester in Neuhaus im Solling. He once dreamed 3 nights in a row that he would shoot a large boar, but that the boar would kill him in turn. His wife thus pleaded with him to stay at home, and he did so. The others, however, went hunting and killed a large boar. And when they returned from the hunt in the evening, the large boar was brought into the yard. And Hackelnberg went outside, grabbed its head, and lifted it up. While doing so, he spoke the words, "So you are the one who wanted to kill me, but now you have been slain yourself." But as he let the head of the boar drop again, one of its tusks scratched his leg. The wound, which was initially ignored, worsened until he died from it. And in his death throes, Hackelnberg proclaimed that since he now had to die without having gone on the hunt, he wanted to hunt forever from now on. And since then, he hunts across the sky until the ends of the world. Every 7 years, he completes one round trip. The night raven flies ahead of him and cries its "Har, har!" It is of unusually great size. And then the dogs arrive and bark, "Yip, yip, yip, yip." And then Hackelnberg himself arrives and shouts, "Toe, toe!" But he is invisible. So we have actually heard a version of this boar tusking one last time we did this. But in this one, there's this idea that he comes back every 7 years. 7 years is a bit of a thing in folklore, and I don't have a reason why, by the way. I have some pet theories, but I try to be cautious about sharing those, because there's an element of authority to being on a screen that I don't deserve, so I don't want to spread rumors as much as I can. But yes, so the first one there, we see a trend that is going to come up with all the wild Huntsman stories, and that is they are hunters in some regard, and they make some sort of mistake with hunting, whether it is they love it too much, or they shoot the wrong thing, or whatever else, and then they get cursed to hunt forever. Some of them ask for it too, and then regret it. Lizzie Rose says, "I want to hear the theories, Rory." Well, the number 7 has some biblical significance, is one possible theory. It also could just be arbitrary. Okay. Carrying on. Our next tale is called The Cliff of the Rehberg Mountain. It also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of translated folklore by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support at his Patreon, which I will have pinned down in a comment below when the video is no longer live. A legend appropriate for the dark, wild region of Rehberg Graben Ditch concerns a cliff face of the Rehberg Mountain and relates the following. In the ancient days, a giant of a man and a veritable Nimrod lived here. Now I'm gonna have to pause because modern context, Nimrod is like a kind of weird word for an idiot. That is not the reference here. Nimrod was a biblical character. I think he was one of Noah's kids. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong about that. And but more importantly, he was a hunter. What they're saying here is he was a giant man and a great hunter like Nimrod. Tough and rough like the rocks on which his abode stood. The bloody trade of the huntsman was his passion, and he hunted through the forest with his retinue every day. The mountains thundered from the barking of the dogs and the blowing of the horns, and the thousandfold echo rebounded in the crevices of the rocks. Even God's peace of the Sunday was unable to tame the huntsman's lust for slaughter and prevent him from pursuing the slender creatures of the forest. A devout hermit frequently admonished him not to disturb the peaceful silence of the Sabbath with his racket. But the words of the old man found the ear of the huntsman closed, and the hermit dejectedly retreated to his hermitage, pursued by the mockery and laughter of the villain. The evening of a beautiful, clear-skied October Sunday cast its shadow over the mountains. The tips of the dark fir trees growing on the rocks and summits of the mountains were cast in the red shine of the evening. A blanket of silence covered the whole region. Only the waves of the river Oder murmured their eternal song in the distance, and only the shy wild animals left the safety of their hideouts. With quiet, careful steps, they carefully emerged from the undergrowth and sought their aromatic food between the wet herbs of the ground. And suddenly the racket of the hunt arose in the distance. The peacefully grazing animals shyly fled back into the thickets, and with every second the noise increased. A snow-white doe raced over the mountains with the speed of the wind, pursued by huntsmen on foot and on steeds, and surrounded by the barking mob of the bloodthirsty hounds. And the ground trembled under the hooves of the daring horses and the footsteps of the wheezing humans. The mountains echoed from the wild "Hey-o!" of the riders, and from the crack of the whips and from the ringing of the weapons. The harried doe moaned and escaped the raging pursuers only by exerting the last of its stamina. Wheezing after the steepest ridges, it flies to the highest pinnacle, where the rocks suddenly sink, and gone is the path. Beneath it, the steep depth; behind it, the enemy is closing. And out of breath, the noble animal stood at the precipice, which is still called Rehberg Klippa, or a cliff of Doe Mountain, after it today. Trembling, it still shied away before the unknown dark abyss. And louder than ever before, the wild hunting calls thundered, and the horn at an ever-closing, ever more dangerous distance. Greedily the hounds pounced on their prey, and overcome by fear for its life, the doe dared the horrible jump and threw itself down into the dreadful depths. Suddenly a strange light appeared. A blinding glare enveloped the tortured animals, and invisible hands of higher spirits carefully lowered it into the safe valley. But the huntsmen, along with their steeds and dogs, were compelled by magical forces to follow the animal. The entire hunting party fell down into the depths of the rocky pinnacles, and great blocks of granite and tall spruce trees collapsed after them and buried the shattered corpses in eternal night. But since that time onwards, it is uncanny in those mountains, and the steps of lonely wanderers quicken when the day star is extinguished in the distant west, and the night hunts through the mountain range on her black steed. For in the midnight hour, when the great owl hovers above the valley with its heavy wings, and when the screeching of the night birds emanates from the rock crevices, when the fanciful moonlight transforms the scrawny tree trunks into ghostly figures, then giant figures of huntsmen scurry through the undergrowth like spirits of the night. A whispering and rustling arises in the dark night between the fir trees, and a dull noise rushes closer like the surging waves of the sea, and from the high mountain the huntsman ventures forth, and with him giants, dwarves, much spook and hellish horror. Figures of the terror shamble with swords with bullets through tangles and rock crevices, on foot and on steeds. Here grin raging faces, and there a long arm threatens. Here shapeless errant lights, these swarms of wolves and bears. That one was a little more elaborately written than most folklore, as you can see. Oh, yes. I see. I decided to quickly Google Nimrod. I see. He's the great-grandson of Noah. I misremembered that part. I remember he was a relation of Noah. But anyways, he was, among other things, known for his hunting. Oh my lord. We're talking about some very caloric goodies in the chat there. So you can see the trend of the sort of German renditions of the Wild Hunts continues, which is there's this idea of a hunter who, for one reason or another, their obsession with hunting comes, I mean, to put it in the simplest terms, the way it gets interpreted is their obsession with hunting comes before God. That's really what it becomes. Now, obviously, that isn't the way that Wild Hunt always was, but that is how it starts to get interpreted for the eras that we're reading. And we'll see that trend, but the different ways that they come before God is a little strange. And with the exception, of course, of the hunter scratched by the tusk, which doesn't seem to really mean much of anything at all. Well, I mean, it's a story of fate, I guess. You know, it's that classic, you try to alter your fate and you confirm it, but other than that. Okay. Our next tale is called King Abel's Hunt. Not that Abel. He's dead. Before he became a king. And it is translated by Jürgen Hubert, and from his collection Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, which you can support as a Patreon in a pinned comment down below. After King Abel, the murderer of his brother Eric, was slain by the Frisians at Midderdom, his corpse was brought to Schleswig and interred at St. Peter Cathedral. But the very next night, such a racket with loud cracking and rasping arose in the church that the startled canons were unable to sing and recite their psalms and their usual nightly prayers, and furthermore a horrible apparition appeared, disturbed and frightened them, as this repeated itself several times in this manner and was reported to the widowed queen. It was decided to remove the king's corpse and take it out of the church and bury it at another location. After a pole had been driven through the coffin, the corpse was now sunk into a swamp within the Perlaveld forest near Gottorp. This location is shown by the locals to the current day and is called Königsgrav, or King's Grave. The old ones assure that the apparitions and ghosts and the ruckus in the church stopped after that day, but a horrible racket can be heard at the place where the king is now buried since that time, both in earlier years and even in our days. Everyone knows this, for people who walked nearby at night were frequently startled by this haunting and became afraid for their lives. Credible men reported and assured that the voice of the huntsman and the blowing of his horn were heard frequently. This was so clearly audible that it could be claimed that someone was hunting there, and this has often been observed by the guards in Gottorp at night. But the people also commonly claim that Abel himself had been seen even in our days. He is as black as coal in his face and on his entire body, but he wasn't in life, by the way. That's supposed to be his cursed nature. He rides on a small horse and is accompanied by 3 hunting dogs, which can often be seen in glowing fiery form. Once a farmer from Shuby drove home from the market. It is possible that he'd drunk a bit too much. At this occasion he heard the shouts of "Hooray!" and the cracking of whips and the snorting and puffing of the fiery steeds and hounds. He called out to King Abel, and after much pleading the latter allowed him to participate in the hunt. And now he had to go forth with the wild troop. He was given powder and musket, and he shot hares aplenty. But when the hunt ended in the morning, he asked King Abel to give him a piece of venison that he could take home. The latter then threw a heavy load on his wagon and said, "Here is a roast for you, far too good for a farmer." And when the farmer arrived home, his wife asked him where he'd been for such a long time, and then told how he'd been on the hunt with King Abel, and that he'd brought a few hares or the hind of a stag. And then his wife looked, but what did she find? It was not the hind of a stag, but the hind of a rotting horse. The statue of King Abel, surrounded by dogs, can still be seen in the palace gardens at Schleswig to this day. Many years ago, there was still a lot of forest near the village of Danneberg, and the farmers used to let their cattle graze in it. Once a maid was sent there by her master to look out for the cows, and when she stepped between the trees, she suddenly heard the loud rumbling in the air, and then King Abel and his hunt approached. He had 10 dogs with him, and they were all completely white. Don't know what that was. Sorry if anyone's currently deaf. Alright, let's continue the story. And I hope that never happens again. Then King Abel and his hunt approached. He had 10 dogs with him. They were all completely white and had fiery tongues hanging from their throats. Then the young woman thought, "Oh, I'm all alone here. What should I do?" But she was wearing a white apron, which she loosened and wrapped around her head, and when she sat down beneath a large tree and wept. König Abel approached with great ruckus, but then he hunted past her. However, one of the dogs came closer, jumped on her lap, and calmly laid down on it. After the spectacle was over, she took the dog with her to Danneberg. To this day, there are still dogs of its breed, but King Abel only has 9 dogs since that time. So, you get a confluence of a lot of different sort of folkloric things there. The one that we sort of brushed past was the pole in the coffin. Now, we have looked at that before in the context of vampires, but not your Romanian or modern sort of Irish literary vampires, the more classic version of vampires, which were more like zombies, would be, in our modern version, we have the stake in the heart and it kills them. But in the older versions, it seems more implied that the stake in the heart is to hold them in the coffin. Yeah. The implication there is that they stake the coffin to keep the spirit of King Abel from arising again. Didn't clearly work. But that's why that passing reference, I believe, is made. I should say it. This is my understanding of it. In this case, we don't get a lot of background other than he liked hunting and he killed his brother, which we're to take as a bad thing, because he was then killed by the Frisians. And I imagine there's probably a bit more to be said historically about King Abel, but I did not have time today to go look up the history of King Abel. I got caught on the fact that it reminded me of Cain and Abel, and then I had to go do something unexpected. So anybody who wants to look up King Abel's history, or if there is even one available, I assume it's a real king. A lot of the time they are, but if it's not, it's not. But that is not anywhere near the end of our hunt origins, our wild hunt origins. Let me have a drink of water and we'll carry on with the High Hunter, which, based on some of the things Uncle Kitty is saying in the chat right now, he may also be talking about a High Hunter. Okay. Our next tale is called The High Hunter. High is in the sky. It's the Wild Hunt, folks. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of translated German folklore from Jürgen Hubert, who you can support by clicking through to Patreon in the pinned comment down below when the video is no longer live. In old times, a large, mighty castle stood in the middle of the forest within David. It was the fortress Davensberg, whose ruins are still visible. Many centuries ago, a mighty king lived in this castle. He was feared widely in the surrounding lands, because he was a coarse, unfriendly man who frequently abused his subjects. It was further said of him that he was allied to the devil, and no one could do him any harm. The hunt was his main preoccupation. For days, he and his huntsmen ran round in the wild forests, and when his farmers had to help him with flushing his prey, he treated them as if they were his dogs. On one Easter Sunday, important detail there, don't miss it, Easter Sunday, he had the desire to go hunting with his companions and to harry prey. And when he was warned not to desecrate the high holiday, he answered, "I don't ever want to enter heaven if I won't kill a stag today." However, his blasphemy was punished. He could not resolve his oath, and since that day he was bound into the David, along with his companions. As soon as the day wanes, his wild roaming and hunting begins. The barking of dogs and the terrible shout of "Holla!" heralds his arrival high up in the air. The people claim that he shall not find rest before he has slain the stag on which he gambled his eternal bliss. In the surrounding areas, the people commonly call him Jager, or High Hunter. Some also say that he drives around on a coach in the company of the devil, as well as plays cards with him. Now, the playing cards with him here, just a speculation on my part, is probably to associate him to things like gambling, which were also considered sort of untoward activities of the rougher parts of the world, of the neighborhood, if you will. I think this is the first one that has an explicit connection to the devil that we've read today, but I should say that there is a lot of like devilry around modern. This isn't modern, but more modern than like than the Valkyrie versions of the Wild Hunt. There's a lot of devil association in it, or at least it's not uncommon. Also, I want to point out that this is the third story where you can hear them shouting, and it's like, "Ho, holla!" I'm just saying, "Ho, ho, ho!" ain't that far off. This isn't a thesis; it's a bunch of vibes. By the way, I never realized that Jager was Hunter. Does that mean Jägermeister is like hunter friend or something? What's Meister again? All right. Now, this title doesn't betray to you that this is a story about the origins of the Wild Hunt, but it is another tale about the origins of the Wild Hunt. Just says master. Yeah, that's right, because Burgermeister. Yeah. Which is not any clearer. I guess it was made for hunters? I'd never really thought about I mean, my friends all called it, my friends and I, when I used to drink, all just called it German cough syrup, which I think it might have actually been at one point. But I genuinely, I don't know. Okay, I'm getting myself off track here. The next tale is called The Wild Huntsman Hates Kröstau. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, translations by Jürgen Hubert. You can support by clicking through on the pinned comment down below when the video is no longer live. The Rasnitzbach stream flows in an uncanny narrow valley between the villages of Strasberg and Kröstau. At night, the barking of dogs and the noise of the hunt are often audible. People hear penetrating shouts, the sounds of horns, and the cracking of whips, as well as wild, swearing voices. The wild huntsman hunts there, and when wanderers encountered him, he screams at them, demanding to know where they're from. And if someone replies, "From Kröstau," they will inevitably experience some lashes of the whip. Other wanderers won't be challenged, but will sometimes be accompanied by the wild huntsman for a while, and perhaps even be gifted with venison from his game bag. Legend does not reveal anything about the nature of this venison, but it has rejuvenated itself in a strange manner in order to explain the hatred of the wild huntsman against Kröstau. As the story goes, this wild huntsman is the ghost of a young hunter who loved a girl from the above-mentioned village, but she became unfaithful to him, and he found her in the arms of another huntsman. In his rage, he slew this rival and the girl, cursed Kröstau, and killed himself in Rasnitz Valley. Now he haunts the region in the midnight hour, accompanied by dogs and the racket of the hunt, occasionally ravages the fields belonging to Kröstau, and pursues the inhabitants of that place with eternal hatred. This is one of the more original ones. In this case, we don't really see much about hunting. I mean, other than he was a young hunter, but the hunting he seems to have done is on unfaithful people. Uncle Kitty says, isn't it supposed to taste like licorice? Talking about Jägermeister. Who drinks licorice-flavored booze? I love black licorice. Love it. It is my preference as far as licorices go, and it is one of the great losses when I discovered I was a celiac, because, well, there is black licorice that is gluten-free. It is hard to find and hard to obtain and expensive therein. But as a result, I liked ouzo, I liked sambuca, I loved absinthe. Absinthe is delicious. And yes, I liked Jägermeister, although that was probably my least favorite of all of those. So to answer your question, Uncle Kitty, quite a few people actually. We have a Greek restaurant. Uncle Kitty says, you know, real licorice will rapidly increase your blood pressure, Rory. A lot of things I eat and drink do that. Yeah, there's a Greek restaurant not too far away from me that I've been to before, and the guy will come around to the table and give you shots of ouzo to drink together. Gia says, I've never had absinthe. So it has this reputation of being kind of dark and murky. And I think that's just because it was a rather strong drink that was made in like bathtubs during Prohibition. It gets that association to hallucinogens. It's never been an hallucinogen. If you're hallucinating when you're drinking it, there's something else in it. But it does have wormwood, which has more of like a caffeine effect. But anyways, the way that you're meant to serve it, where you drip it through either some ice at least, if not a sugar cube, makes it a very kind of light, summery, herby ouzo, basically. It's like a more complex ouzo. It's quite good, if you like that kind of thing. If you don't like black licorice, it's horrible. Why would you? Okay. Our next tale is called Hubertus Cave, near Sillium. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of German folklore translated by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support at his Patreon, which will be in a pinned comment down below. The Hubertus Cave is located in the middle of a forest called the Hackelnberg. This spot is now commonly called Jägerhaus, or Hunter's House, in old times when everyone was still Catholic. I won't dig into that. Many Catholic clerics indulged in the joys of the hunt here. One of these was Hubertus. In other respects, he was a rather devout man, but he was eager for hunting indeed. For a long time, he had not shot a stag, and he had a strong desire I hit the wrong button. To shoot a stag once more. Thus he went on the hunt on Christmas Eve, and told his companions that he wanted to shoot a stag today, even if it were to wear the holy crust of Christ between its antlers. Well, the moon shone brightly when he saw a large stag jump up at a distance of about 50 feet, and so he shot at it and hit it so well that it immediately dropped dead. And when he walked to the stag, he saw with terror that the Holy Cross indeed hung between its antlers. Full of dismay and fear, he went home. And after his death, he had to travel through the air and hunt as Hasjaka. This one's pretty straightforward. I think it's the first one where the person is not, strictly speaking, a hunter. I'm trying to think of any other tale we've read. They weren't a hunter. Like they were of some other occupation, I should say. They all were hunters in the sense that that was a pastime of theirs. It's such a strange conceit, too, that I feel like there's probably something else to it. You know, the idea of this cross hanging between the antlers, maybe that was more of a thing back then. I understand what it's saying. It feels like a random way to exemplify that this was some sort of holy or touched deer. But it does also echo a bit the story that we heard with, I think it was the Cliff of Rehberg, where they chase it to the cliff and a doe is sort of not to be touched. All right. So we're on to our last tale. It is a little more, a little longer than the others. Well, not all of them. It's about as long as one of them, at least. But the last few, it's a little longer than that. But it is our last origin tale we're reading. I do want to emphasize one more time that we are just reading collected stuff around Germany. And that is hardly the only origin tales of the Wild Hunt. There is tons of others, depending on what region of Europe you're looking at. Uncle Kitty says 100 milligrams a day of licorice can be toxic depending on your body weight. They mean the like licorice root, right? They're not just talking about 100 grams of candy, which only has a portion of it in it. Okay. Our next tale is called The Freischütz Marne. And it comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a collection of translated German folklore by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support by clicking through to the Patreon in the pinned comment below. There was once a farmer's son, a wild young man, who would commit to no work, neither through pleading nor through threats, and would spend the entire day roaming the fields. His parents spoiled him somewhat and did not pressure him much to do anything. Thus, once he was grown up, he ran away in secret, dedicated himself to hunting so that he could live as he pleased. He finally married and attained a small estate in the middle of a forest. A small lot of farmland was included, and he fed his family partially from this, but primarily from his hunting. They were not prospering, and frequently they did not have bread in the house, for the hunt only allowed for an irregular income, while they neglected their farming. Once, he went hunting, starting in the early morning, but he had not been able to shoot anything by the evening. In a sour mood, he set forth for home. But when he looked up, he saw a stranger at some distance. That stranger must have been on the hunt as well, for he carried a rifle and a hunting bag. The huntsman doubled his steps to catch up to the stranger, but mysteriously, no matter how much he hurried, the stranger stayed at the same distance. Even though the latter maintained a leisurely pace. The huntsman finally stuck his forefinger in his mouth and whistled in the manner of the huntsman. The high, shrill tone penetrated widely through the night. A few ravens were startled out of the old trees, standing nearby, filled the air with their eerie cawing. But the stranger did not appear to have heard anything and walked onward without looking around. But when he reached a crossroads, he suddenly stood still, turned round to the huntsman. He was a handsome young man, and he gave a friendly greeting. The huntsman returned the greeting and immediately noticed that the hunting bag of the stranger was filled to capacity. His first question was naturally how he'd come to such a rich bounty, while his own efforts and dexterity had barely bagged any game as of late. The stranger replied that he was in possession of a great secret, which ensured that his aim was always true, and his bullets never missed their mark. Then he started as if he was about to turn to the next path, but the huntsman now was even more eager to learn more, held him back, pleaded for the stranger to share his secret with him, promising to thank him in whatever way he was able. "I ask no further thanks from you than the fulfillment of a condition. If you promise me with an oath to share your secret with no other person, then I shall share it with you in confidence. This is the only condition, but it is a necessary one." The huntsman was immediately ready to give this oath. In the moment when he raised his hand, the ravens came from the forest and circled the two men, first in wide and then ever-narrowing paths. The stranger shared the secret with the huntsman, and then the two said their farewells, and the birds dispersed in different directions. From that moment on, the huntsman was like a different person. Contrary to his previous habits, he stayed within the house for days, quietly walking up and down, and avoiding all questions of his wife. But she did not stop questioning him, and finally, in a moment of weakness, she managed to get him to tell the entire story. Then she said that he ought to attempt this, for perhaps it would save them from their dire straits. The sin of it could hardly be that enormous, as well as further promptings and speeches, until he finally decided to attempt the measure that the stranger had recommended. "For," said the stranger, "if you want to obtain the ability to become an infallible marksman, you must load your rifle with a piece of altar bread stolen from the altar in the church." And this was what the stranger had recommended to the huntsman. Thus, on the next Sunday, the huntsman went into church, and when he received communion, he took the altar bread home with him, stole it away. And then he took his rifle from the wall, furthermore packed a white cloth, and then went into the forest to a clearing to do everything as prescribed. The sun stood at noon's height. He spread the cloth on the ground, stood on it with his feet, loaded the rifle, but instead of lead he used the altar bread. Then he aimed the gun barrel at the sun and shot at it. Immediately, a black cloud appeared and covered the sky. Thunder and lightning broke loose. And the huntsman now wanted to flee to his home and bowed down to pick up the white cloth, but then saw that the location of his footprints were marked with fresh blood. He ran away in mortal fright, but as he reached his home, it was ablaze with bright flames, and his wife and children ran towards him and wailed, and at the same time the stranger he'd encountered recently appeared before him as none other than the devil himself. He told him
that he would have to hunt forever from now on, with his wife and children accompanying him as dogs.
And from this time on, he lives over the old trees in the forest near the two ravens during the day, but at night he roars with much noise through the air, accompanied by his dogs. People are now calling this the Wild Hunt, and when people hear him pass by and imitate the calls and the barking, he throws down bones. But he must bear this punishment until Judgment Day, and cannot find rest until then. All right. Well, there you go. Several different tales of the Wild Hunt. Did you folks have a favorite? Mine remains Frau Gauden, which I didn't read this night, but if I had to pick another, it would be this last tale. It is probably the most, like, story. You know, it's not just weird things that happened. It's a tale, and I do like that aspect of it. Tammy was walking the dog, but has been listening. That's fine. Well, maybe not the traditional Christmas for most people tales, but for me, the Wild Hunt is quintessentially this time of year. Maybe not Christmas exactly, but this time of year. Lizzie Rose says, I like that last story too. Yeah, so does GS. Tammy says, well, thank you for the stories, Rory, and you guys in the chat. Thank you for the interesting talk. Hope everyone has a wonderful night. Hope you're doing well, Tammy. Hope you're doing well as well, Uncle Kitty. And hope recovery is coming. Lizzie Rose says, I can see a whole novella or something based on that. Indeed. It's definitely the most, like, there's two tales in here that are very clearly the collectors, for one reason or another, kind of wrote them in a more novelized style. This one and the other one was The Cliff of Rehberg, which was very descriptive and not just, you know, matter of fact the way a lot of folklore is. But as always, I'll remind people that these stories are your stories, frankly. That's how folklore works. So if you want to rewrite one of them or build on it, you have every right to. You don't need to make excuses. It is a canon that we all participate in. All right. Well, I won't drag it out then. We will call it there. For anybody who is out there lurking, thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me while we tell these stories. If you want to hear more about the Wild Hunt, there is, I think it's called, it's not Christmas until Odin raids the countryside or something, I think I called it. But anyways, it's on the Fireside Fairytales playlist, which is on our channel there. You can scroll down and take a look at it. And at any rate, thank you very much for tuning in and hanging out with me in the chat. GS, Lizzie Rose, Genera, I know you were there for a moment. Uncle Kitty, Tammy Morelli, Jumpstore, if I didn't already say it. And I hope I'm not forgetting anybody else. Anybody else I may have forgotten, I apologize. And as for me, I'll keep the fire warm. You folks have yourself a good sleep.